up today in a rare move. South Korea summons China's ambassador to Seoul for his controversial remarks about the deployment of a U.S. missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. The U.S. and China are reportedly close to reaching a final agreement on a draft UN Security Council resolution sanctioning North Korea for its recent nuclear and missile tests. First President Park Geun-hye slams the main opposition party for continuing its filibuster to stall the passage of anti-terror legislation she deems necessary to protect the nation from North Korea and other terror threats. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello to our viewers around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Thursday, February 25th here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Broom. Our top story this morning, the South Korean government summoned the Chinese ambassador on Wednesday to demand an explanation of the off-key remarks he made about the potential deployment of a U.S. missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Kwon So-ah starts us off.
The Foreign Ministry called in Chinese ambassador to Seoul, Chiu Kuo-hong, on Wednesday over remarks he made a day earlier to South Korea's main opposition Minju Party leader Kim Jong-in. During talks, he told Kim that a U.S. THAAD deployment could destroy Korea-China relations in an instant. Seoul's Deputy Minister for Political Affairs Kim Hong-kyun demanded a sincere explanation for the comments to determine whether they were personal in nature or the stance of the Chinese government. According to the ministry, Ambassador Chiu acknowledged the issue is a sensitive matter and vowed continuous efforts on developing the relationship between South Korea and China. China's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chuning was reportedly skeptical of the accuracy of the wording could be destroyed, but expressed hopes the THAAD issue would not affect long-term bilateral ties. Earlier in the day, the presidential office of Cheongwade made clear that a THAAD U.S. missile defense system on South Korean soil would aim to protect the nation from North Korea's continual threats, no matter how strongly China objects. Presidential spokesman Chung Yun-guk told reporters Wednesday that a THAAD deployment is part of South Korea's arsenal of countermeasures against North Korea's provocations based on its right to self-defense. South Korea and the U.S. are set to start working-level talks soon on the deployment of the controversial missile defense system. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, as a follow-up to Soa's report, South Korea and the United States are expected to hold their first joint working group meeting in the coming days on the deployment of the THAAD missile defense system to the Korean peninsula. Speaking at the U.S. House Armed Services Committee on Wednesday, U.S. Forces Korea General Curtis Scaparrotti said it will take some time to deploy the system to the south, as the working group has to decide on the optimum location and related details. It will also have to be coordinated in accordance with the status of forces agreement that covers issues of U.S. troops stationed here in South Korea. Scaparrotti said the first meeting is expected within a week. The U.S. general said the THAAD deployment is important and necessary to build a layered defense in light of the growing threat posed by North Korea. The United States and China are expected to reach final agreement in the coming hours on a draft UN Security Council sanctions resolution on North Korea for its recent nuclear and missile tests. Diplomatic sources say the final agreement is expected when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meets US National Security Advisor Susan Rice in Washington on Wednesday local time. The sources say that while the exact details are not yet available, the resolution does include the strongest punitive measures yet. There's speculation it could include a ban on imports of coal, iron and other mineral imports from the north, one of the biggest sources of cold hard cash for the regime. The resolution will be the international community's response to North Korea's fourth nuclear test on January 6th and its long-range missile launch just over a month later. Now, South Korea's main opposition party is continuing with a filibuster to block a long-stalled counterterrorism bill. They fear that, if approved, the nation's spy agency will gain the power to wiretap ordinary citizens. At risk, however, is a bill on the new-look electoral map. Shin Se-min with the details.
The main opposition party's filibuster is well underway, passing its first 24 hours, fueled by endless rounds of speeches. Representative Kim Kwang-jin of the main opposition Minju Party of Korea was the first to take the floor when things got started at 7 p.m. Tuesday evening. And following up on the list of speakers, Eun Soo-mi, who spoke for 10 hours and 18 minutes. She broke the Korean record set by Representative Park Han-sang in 1969 and the late former President Kim Dae-jung in 1964, and even outpaced Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, who spoke for 8 hours and 37 minutes while filibustering in the U.S. Congress in 2010. Lawmakers from the minor opposition People's Party and Justice Party are also siding with their Minju Party counterparts. The marathon filibuster session, the first since the rule has been put into practice in 2012, was initiated by the Minju Party to block the passage of a pending counterterrorism bill after Assembly Speaker Chung Ih-hwa moved to call a vote on the legislation. The Minju Party says the bill will give the National Intelligence Service the power to eavesdrop on citizens and conduct surveillance on their private accounts and communications. The ruling Saenuri Party and the president, however, say that the bill will better protect the public and the nation amid the growing threats from North Korea and international terrorism. The bill has brought Parliament to a standstill again following a weeks-long impasse that saw a recent breakthrough in the form of an agreement on redrawing the country's electoral map. The rival parties had agreed to vote on the legislation on Friday, but it is unclear as to whether that session will go forward. For now, the Minju Party has vowed to continue its filibuster until the end of the current extraordinary session on March 10th. But it also said it'll do all it can to address the situation, so it'll take some time to see whether the current filibuster will jeopardize the two pending bills or bring about a resolution. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye had some strong words for the National Assembly on Wednesday, pointing at its failure to pass economy-related bills and that counter-terrorism bill that's being held up by a filibuster. Park Ji-won reports.
Chairing an economic consultation meeting on Wednesday, President Park Geun-hye had harsh words for lawmakers from the opposition parties and called on them to stop blocking a counter-terrorism bill. She said the economy cannot thrive in an unstable society where acts of terrorism could happen at any time.
많은 국민이 희생을 치르고 나서 통과를 시키겠다는 얘기인지 이거는 정말 그 어떤 나라에서도 있을 수 없는 기가 막힌 현상들이라고 생각을 합니다.
President Park Geun-hye also urged the parliament to do its legislative duty before this assembly ends its term in May. She called on lawmakers to pass a package of economy-related bills, including bills on labor reform that her administration has been promoting. She said it is deplorable that all the necessary bills to create jobs, especially for the nation's young people, have been awaiting a vote for so long. She added that making the nation's labor market more flexible would generate new growth momentum and strengthen the economy. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, President Park Geun-hye enters her fourth year in office on this Thursday, and in the fourth of her series of 5 special reports, we are going to take a look at the key words that have shaped the president's public remarks, reflecting her time in office thus far. Our presidential office correspondent Song Ji-sun with the report.
What was President Park Geun-hye's key focus during her past 3 years in office? The presidential office has analyzed over 1,000 remarks the president has made in public speeches and press briefings using big data. The word she has used the most is people, which she mentioned over 5,000 times, followed by Republic of Korea. Next on the list was the economy, which has certainly been a key focus for her since her inauguration.
어렵게 시작한 경기 회복의 불씨를
반드시 살려내서 경제를 활성화하고 민생을 안정시키는데 국가적 역량을 집중해 나갈 것입니다. 창의와 혁신의 기반을 둔 경제로 체질을 바꿔가면서 국민소득 4만 불 시대를 여는 기반을 다져가겠습니다. 그동안 추진해온 경제혁신 3개년 계획을 잘 마무리하고 창조 경제와 문화 융성을 확실하게 뿌리 내려서 우리 경제의 활력과 일자리를 만들어 갈 것입니다.
The president has also made frequent mention of the phrase creative economy, reflecting her continued emphasis on growth through entrepreneurship. Other key phrases on the list were also about the economy, including economic revitalization, economic innovation, and job creation. The president's creative economy drive is now in full swing, with the launch of 17 centers completed last year. The centers aim to foster startups by matching them with advisors and corporate partners that can help them launch their businesses. Young job seekers can also get help at the employment zones within the centers.
Thanks to the mentoring from the Innovation Center and technical support from Hyoseong, we finally succeeded in developing a heat inducer using carbon fiber.
I moved to a new town and it was difficult to find a new job on my own. Then I heard that the local employment and welfare center was hosting an employment fair. That's how I found my job.
In keeping with these initiatives, President Park has vowed that 2016 will be the year that people feel the effects of the policies she's put in place and called on the people to help the country make another leap. 송지선, Arirang News.
Now, snowballing household debt has been identified as one of the biggest threats to the Korean economy, with the total sum reaching a landmark figure in dollar terms. The concerns are weighing on the government's efforts to turn the sluggish economy around. Hwang Ji-ae with the details.
The Bank of Korea says household debt, which includes sales on credit, hit a record high of 1,200 trillion won. That's around $1 trillion as of the end of last year. This is the largest amount logged since 2002 when related data were first compiled. It's also up roughly $100 billion from a year ago, marking the fastest pace of growth on record. The rise was led by the growth of household loans, including mortgages, on the back of an upbeat real estate market. The growth of sales on credit that shot up in the third quarter last year due to measures to jumpstart spending, leading to high credit card bills, this time slowed down slightly. The household debt problem is cited as a potential risk by many economists, with growing fears about the property market losing steam in the next 2 to 3 years. But they also add that it's already a burden to the economy as it's stacked up with longer-term issues like the aging population.
People are choosing to save instead of spend, facing uncertain economic conditions. And they also want to prepare for post-retirement. This kind of tendency won't change easily.
The rise in household debt in the fourth quarter actually also has to do with government measures to clamp down on debt. Ahead of tighter guidelines when screening applicants for loans that kicked in this month, more people who are looking to borrow turned to banks before those measures went into force. So now, with policymakers unleashing fresh efforts to tackle swelling debt levels, eyes are focused on whether those numbers start showing some changes in the first quarter of this year. Hwang Ji-ae, Arirang News.
Now, when it comes to eye-watering levels of debt and general economic turmoil, Greece and Spain spring to mind, as both went through a torrid time in the aftermath of the financial crisis that rocked the Eurozone a few years ago. But unlike Greece, Spain appears to be on the road to recovery, and an expert says other countries could learn a thing or two from Spain's response. Kim Ji-yeon reports from Barcelona.
Spain was one of the countries hardest hit by the 2008 global financial crisis. Its economy was left in tatters after the bubble burst on its housing market and national debt soared. Even some 8 years later, the Eurozone's fourth largest economy is still suffering from one of the worst unemployment rates in the bloc at around 20%. So can it truly be said that Spain is back on its feet now?
Spain has been working hard to dig out of its hole after it was forced to ask for an EU bailout in 2012. Grazie.
And those efforts seem to be paying off as its economy is recovering on the back of rising consumption. The Spanish government's austerity measures, while painful, have helped the country recover more flexibility in its labor market. However, this came at the expense of big cuts to pensions and healthcare services. Soaring domestic consumption, industry investment, and record tourism also helped the Spanish economy grow 3.2% in 2015, its fastest pace since 2007.
The banks have understood that it's better at the end to restructure the debt and to get it paid later, but to get it paid, then don't do the restructuring and then having the company go bankrupt and lose everything. So a lot of this has already been done, a lot of this renegotiation. So I think that the economy is now in a much better shape and going up reasonably.
The International Monetary Fund forecasts the Spanish economy will grow 2.7% this year. The professor says the recovery in Spain and some other European countries are good reference cases for a country like China that is also restructuring its economy.
So sometimes the press says the economy collapses, goes from 7 to 6.9. Well, that's not a big collapse. But if you go into depth, you see, okay, there is people who were doing quite well, that they do well but not so much, have gone down, and people who were very poor, then they go up. So at the end, it's much better, this 6.9, than the other, because this generates a lot of consumption.
He says countries that depend on China for exports would also benefit as demand for their goods and services would increase. However, the professor adds that a Brexit or Britain leaving the EU would severely damage the Eurozone, as it will lose its biggest English-speaking finance hub. Brits decide on whether they want to stay in or leave the EU in late June. Kim Jung, Arirang News, Barcelona.
Well, that's all we have for now on this Thursday morning here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom. Thanks as always for watching. Goodbye.